It's a two-part tale as Atari Archive looks into the history of Atlantis and Cosmic Arc. Towards the end of July, Imagic debuted its newest title, Atlantis. Written by Vice President of Software Development Dennis Koble, it follows the initial trio of Imagic releases, having a remarkable audiovisual fidelity and intense action that isn't quite like anything else on the home market at the time. Certainly the theme is unique, eschewing the now common themes of outer space games or those based on real-world activities. As the name suggests, Atlantis is based on the legendary lost city of Atlantis, which, as the story goes, was a powerful island nation that sunk into the sea. Originally used by Plato as an allegorical empire in some of his philosophical works, Atlantis has taken on a life of its own in the 2,000+ years since his writings. Some people have wondered if Atlantis was written by Plato, was based on an actual island nation destroyed in some cataclysm, and has since sparked many, many works, the less crackpot of which use it as a fictional setting or plot device, such is the case with Imagic's video game. Atlantis is a pretty unique take on both a standard vertical shooter and something akin to Missile Command, where players take control of 3 turrets and are tasked with shooting down attacking Gorgon craft before they destroy part of the titular mythical city. You have no control over which angle each of the turrets are set to attack, only which one is firing and when. The enemy ships will zip along the screen horizontally, approaching at a lower altitude each time they successfully complete a pass until finally getting low enough to the ground to strafe with a laser beam. Every 10,000 points, part of your cityscape is restored. Once the last structure of the city has been destroyed, the game ends with a little flying saucer ferrying away the survivors of Atlantis, a deliberate tie-in to another Imagic game that came out around the same time as Koble's game, Rob Fulop's Cosmic Arc, which we'll get to later. There is an impressive amount of information about Atlantis' creation thanks to a contemporary interview in video games, a documentary that aired on TV during the game's heyday, and interviews with both Koble and Imagic art director Michael Becker done by Scott Stilphen for his Atari Compendium website. Thanks to these sources, we know a fair amount about what was one of Imagic's top games. In a 1983 interview published in Video Games, Koble remarked that he'd wanted to do a game based on the Atlantis myth for a long time, before settling on the game design seen here, that the finished product was 95% of what he'd originally envisioned. In his interview with Scott Stilphen, Koble said that the concept was an original one that he had come up with, and remarked that for the most part, each game was developed by a single programmer with the other staff providing feedback and input. A Retro Gamer magazine feature on the game from 2021 saw Koble talk about how Atlantis was a simple game designed to use Imagic's latest programming technology and techniques developed by the late Bob Smith. Smith's technique allowed for 6 moving objects on screen at a time, more than the VCS hardware was really designed for, while Koble also referenced Imagic's network development stations that allowed them to code in higher-level languages than assembly. Koble also acknowledged Atari's Missile Command was likely a subconscious influence, as he was a huge fan of the game at the time. A separate interview Stilphen conducted with Imagic's art director Michael Becker also brought up Atlantis, with Becker stating that he helped out on graphics not only on the VCS release of the game, but also its conversions to the Intellivision, Odyssey 2, and VIC-20. Thanks to the art tools designed by Bob Smith and Rob Fulop for the Atari 800 computer, Becker said that he and his team were able to digitally paint animation frames used in most of Imagic's works. We can see a glimpse of what Atlantis looked like early in its development in an episode of PBS's Enterprise focused on the game's creation. Koble demonstrates an early prototype with placeholder graphics of the future Gorgon ships bouncing back and forth, as well as Becker showing off how the graphics are designed on their development station. By March, the city's locations have been set, and the graphics are closer to how they'll look in the final version, though Koble mentions that there are still some graphical bugs that have been popping up with the ships in motion. The bullets do work, but aren't aligned properly with the barrels and are slower than he wanted them to be. The game was more or less ready by May, and appears to have tested very well with kids. Separately, the director of the episode made a few comments on Atari Age's forum back in 2009, remarking that the episode was originally going to be about Osborne computers, before he pushed to feature Imagic instead due to his interest in Atari games, and Imagic president Bill Grubb's showmanship, adding that the prototypes of Atlantis all had a maddening calliope tune that thankfully didn't make it to the final game. Much like Demon Attack before it, Atlantis is an incredibly intense game that feels like it could have been an arcade release. Your 3 turrets are controlled by the button and joystick in a pretty efficient manner, push the button while holding left or right, and their respective turret fires, while keeping the stick in neutral has the center turret active. While the center turret is the easiest to land a shot with, you earn fewer points for destroying enemies with it, and it'll be the first structure destroyed by strafing enemy ships, making it vital for you to learn how to successfully hit them with the side turrets. You also need to keep an eye out for bandits, small, fast-moving enemy ships that make a buzzing sound when they appear. Destroying one of these will destroy all enemies on the screen, but they're remarkably tricky to hit, especially as the game continues to speed up. Even a few waves in, the game's pace becomes incredibly rapid, and keeping up can be a struggle for anyone not dedicated to Atlantis' defense. That said, there are some truly incredible high scores for this title, indicating that at least some people really got a handle on it. And that's just the main game mode. Variations include disabling the central turret, a strange two-player co-op mode where each player controls one of the side turrets, and training modes where enemy ships never really scale up that much in speed. This is probably as close to a children's mode as Atlantis offers, and is a pretty good way to get your feet wet with the title. There's not a lot of variations in this game, reflecting an increasingly common approach to VCS development, but the base game is good enough that I don't think anyone is going to miss it. We don't have firm numbers for how well Atlantis sold, but Koble has consistently referred to it as Imagic's second best-selling title after Demon Attack, and one that sold more than 2 million copies. This puts it in the upper echelon of VCS releases, particularly for a third-party game. Only a scant few, such as Demon Attack, Activision's Pitfall, or Parker Brothers' Frogger manage those kinds of numbers. This was also one of 3 Imagic games Activision started selling in early 1988. When Imagic's last CEO, Bruce Davis, went to Activision to serve as the Chief Operating Officer and later CEO. As Davis continues to claim ownership of the Imagic catalog, it's likely that this was entirely due to his presence at the company as the rights holder, although it doesn't appear that anyone knows for certain. As such, the ownership rights of Demon Attack, Atlantis, and Moonsweeper remain a bit murky. Atlantis saw nigh universal glowing praise. Video Game Update gave it a full 4 stars for gameplay and graphics, describing both it and Cosmic Arc, which debuted mere weeks later, as possessing arcade-quality visuals and original play action. Joyce Worley gave it a 9 out of 10 in the Arcade Express review from September, remarking that the control scheme was clever and that it was one of the best action games of the year. Joystick gave it 4 stars as well, writing that it was challenging and that the graphics were spectacular. Video Games wrote that it had no peer graphically, and that it would keep players glued to their joysticks. Electronic Games ended up giving it a Certificate of Merit for Game of the Year in 1983, losing out to Imagic's Demon Attack, while Video Gaming Illustrated devoted 4 pages to breaking down strategies for both the Atari VCS and Intellivision versions of the game. Imagic clearly knew they had something special in their hands with this one, as in the fall they held the Defend Atlantis contest. Players could send in a photo of their high score on Game 1 of Atlantis alongside a proof of purchase seal from the manual to enter, with the top 4 scorers flying out to Bermuda to compete against one another on November 14th, 1982 at the Southampton Princess Hotel for $10,000 in gold. The main hitch was that more than 4 people qualified, having maxed out the score on the game, leading to Imagic to mail out a modified version of the game, Atlantis 2, along with instructions on how to approach the tiebreaker. Atlantis 2 is faster, more difficult, and provides fewer points for each ship destroyed than the retail cartridge, and this was enough for Imagic to winnow it down its competitors for the big prize. The ultimate winner was Andrew Levine of Needham, Massachusetts, whose play duly impressed Koble. No doubt owing to Atlantis' massive success for Imagic, the game was converted to several other platforms, as Becker mentioned. On the computer side of things, Atlantis appeared on the Atari 400 and 800 with minor graphical enhancements, but generally it hews very closely to how the VCS original plays. The VIC-20 version drops the center turret and forces you to only fight with those on the outer edges, compensating by making the enemy ships get lower to the surface to begin their strafing runs. This design choice was echoed in 1983's Magnavox Odyssey 2 release, one of only 2 third-party games published in the US, and a thoroughly impressive conversion. Becker remarked that the graphics largely relied on the built-in character set for Imagic's 2 Odyssey 2 releases, making this even more impressive. It also reviewed well. Rawson Stovall, the Vid Kid, wrote that it was his favorite Odyssey 2 game thanks to its speedy action and colorful graphics, while the Logical Gamer reviewers heaped praise upon it as an excellent conversion and one that edged out the Odyssey Demon Attack release in their eyes as one of the best games on the platform. But perhaps most well known of these alternate Atlantises is the Intellivision version, which reworks the concept in fascinating ways. Instead of your guns firing along specific paths, here you control a targeting cursor with the disc and use the side action buttons to determine which cannon is firing. It's much more akin to Missile Command in this regard, though since Missile Command never appeared on television, that's perhaps fine. Additionally, this version lets you take command of a flying saucer to do battle in the air above Atlantis, firing shots to the left and right. Your saucer only has a limited fuel supply and needs to be successfully docked before running out or being destroyed, lest you go without its assistance for a while. And you will want the saucer flying as long as possible, as Atlantis on the Intellivision has a day-night cycle. During the night, you can only see the Gorgon ships when they fly within your searchlights. This version of the game was very well received. Video Game Update gave it a perfect score with stunning graphics and great use of music. Alongside Imagic's original Intellivision games like Microsurgeon or Beauty and the Beast, and other enhanced VCS conversions like Demon Attack, Atlantis really helped the company establish its identity as the premier third-party publisher on the Intellivision platform, and Atlantis is very much an incredible achievement there. At any platform, Atlantis is one of the gems of the American home gaming library in its day. And while the VCS version doesn't have all the bells and whistles of its Intellivision counterpart, that doesn't make it a lesser experience by any stretch. This is a VCS game that holds up with the best of its contemporary arcade kin, and probably Koble's best work on the platform. Our other game this video is Rob Fulop's Cosmic Ark, which appears to have debuted in late July or early August, depending on where you were in the US. Perhaps not quite concurrent with Atlantis, but close to it. Fulop mentioned in an interview with Retro Gamer that he had grown tired of writing shooter games after Demon Attack. While recognizing that he could have created a Demon Attack 2 and done very well financially, he was interested in doing something else. That ended up becoming a conservation-themed title with Cosmic Ark. Here, the Atlantean crew of the Ark has traveled to the Alpha Rho system to rescue creatures living on the planets there before the sun goes nova, fending off meteor swarms and evading automated defense systems while carrying out its mission. In practice, the game alternates between waves of fighting off meteors from your mothership before it descends to a planet, whereupon it sends out a shuttle ship to pick up beasties in a tractor beam. You only have a limited amount of time to grab both of them before a meteor comes down that you need to defend against, necessitating another fight against a meteor swarm before continuing your mission. After gathering both critters from a given location, the game increases in difficulty. In a 1983 interview with Video Games, Dennis Koble and Imagic president Bill Grubb talked a bit about Cosmic Ark's creation from their perspectives. Koble recalled seeing Fulop working on a shooting game called Reaction in the lab at one point, and the two came up with the idea of making it a sequel of sorts to Atlantis, with the survivors of the last game going planet to planet to rescue animals. Grubb took credit for the flying saucers themselves, claiming in the interview that when he first saw the prototype for Cosmic Ark, everything was still just squares until he recommended that they be changed to saucers. Rob Fulop himself hasn't talked as much about Cosmic Ark as Demon Attack, understandably, as the latter was the game that made him a rock star. But he mentioned in an interview with Paleotronic that Cosmic Ark was originally based on a visual starfield glitch that he discovered with the VCS, designing a game around it to stump Activision's programmers. That glitch, where two VCS clock cycle timings beat against each other, results in a twinkling starfield unlike pretty much anything seen on the VCS beforehand. In Retro Gamer, Fulop indicates that his knowledge of this glitch dates back to when he was developing Missile Command for Atari. And while no one understood how and why it worked, he filed it away in his mind that he wanted to utilize it for a game. Much as with Atlantis, the sprite work was at least done in part by Michael Becker, hired as Imagic's art director and creative director. Fulop credits Becker with coming up with most of the beasties you're trying to rescue. Becker was also responsible for the box art on this one, as he was for most of Imagic's games. Cosmic Ark seems to owe at least its Meteor Swarm game mode to the Midway arcade title Space Zap, which saw players defending a central base from enemies with a turret that can fire in one of 4 cardinal directions. Space Zap saw one official home port in its day to the Bally Professional Arcade under the name Space Fortress, which was remarkably faithful and an excellent fit for the console, even if it misses out on the arcade machine's lovely 4-button control scheme. From an indie development standpoint, it was also the inspiration for a Bally Basic title called Astro Zap 2000 by George Moses, which won a $100 prize in the Arcadian newsletter in July 1982. As well as the VCS homebrew game Vault Assault, initially released at the 2001 Classic Gaming Expo by Brian Prescott. It's a fun and fairly simple game concept, and while Cosmic Ark's rendition gets incredibly difficult due to the chunky size of your mothership, it never really overstays its welcome, and the game is fairly generous with lives here, represented by a fuel bar that recharges as you destroy meteors, and tops off when you collect both beasties on a planet. But the meat of the Cosmic Ark experience arguably happens planetside. After surviving a meteor swarm, the Ark descends on one of the planets in the star system to try and rescue two of the beasties on the surface. Early on, this is pretty easy, but as beasties speed up, it can be harder to catch them in your tractor beam before the alarms start going off. You see, you have a limited amount of time to do this before an alarm begins buzzing, requiring your shuttle to return to the Ark in time to keep a meteor from crashing into it with the main guns. If that happens, you have to go deal with another meteor swarm round before returning to attempt to pick up the beasties again. You also have to contend with planetary defenses in the form of two turrets that will periodically zap a laser between them, instantly destroying your shuttle. While these zaps are infrequent at first, by the time the game hits its full difficulty level, you will have a vanishingly small window to make it through the laser with how frequently it fires. And of course, if you're destroyed, the beasties are returned to the surface, even if you picked up one of them on a previous trip and had to leave due to a meteor. Fortunately, you do have an endless supply of shuttles, meaning the only real threat for a game over is getting destroyed in the meteor swarms. Once that finally happens, the same little ship from the end of Atlantis zooms out of the Ark, dashing off to parts unknown. This particular bit of connective tissue between Imagic games never really extended beyond this one. While Fulop has claimed the ship appears again in his next published game, Fathom, it doesn't appear in game code, nor does he recall any way of triggering it. The game options here are fairly limited, continuing the new VCS trend of a focused number of game modes. In addition to the default game, there is a mode specifically for the meteor swarm levels, presumably to placate those who only want the action portions of the Cosmic Ark, and advanced missions that set the game to the highest difficulty, either for the full two-portion arrangement, or just for the meteor swarms. Much like Atlantis, Cosmic Ark also features an interesting co-op game mode where players divvy up their roles. One commands the mothership and fights meteors, while the other handles the shuttle ship and rescues animals. The right difficulty switch flips who does which job, while the left difficulty switch adjusts how wide the arc is during meteor swarms. The final odd option comes from the color switch on the console. In some revisions of the cartridge, switching this to black and white mode will shut off the Starfield effect. Cosmic Ark is an impressive game for this time frame on the VCS. Much like SpectraVision's Planet Patrol, it's divvying the game up into bespoke segments, but unlike that work, Cosmic Ark really hangs together on both ends, with Fulop really recognizing how long each segment can last before they get kind of bothersome. The back and forth nature of the game is simply pretty appealing, and it's fun to see what kind of weird beastie graphics Fulop and Becker came up with here. The game is not without its faults. As you progress, more often the meteors will take a wiggling approach towards your arc, which requires better timing to actually catch them while they're in the center of their movement pattern. But you have very little time to react, meaning in practice you will probably just get walloped. The planetary defenses also get incredibly difficult to move past at a certain point, with the game providing only the barest amount of time to slip past them. And considering you'll need to do this multiple times to collect the beasties, it's a wonder anybody mastered this game to the extent that they are manageable. Much like Atlantis, Cosmic Ark saw a lot of glowing praise. Joyce Morley gave it a 9 out of 10 in Arcade Express, considering it pretty to look at and fun to play. Video Game Update praised Cosmic Ark's soundscape in particular, giving it 4 stars for its graphics and 3.5 for the gameplay. Video Games gave it high marks for originality and its humanitarian theme of saving creatures instead of destroying them, even as it is overshadowed by Atlantis. The December edition of science fiction magazine Omni had an article with their 10 best video games available on the market. While writer Scott Morris only included Demon Attack from Imagic, he did recommend Atlantis, Cosmic Ark, and Trickshot as other excellent Imagic titles worth checking out. On the flip side, Richard Edwards, writing for Space Gamer, felt that the graphics were not particularly interesting, and that both game modes were a bit thin, adding that it doesn't have much replayability. A reader to video games also wrote in remarking his disappointment with Cosmic Ark, who found the game could be cheesed handily by just staying on a lower level and destroying meteors for points without progressing. Anytime you need fuel, he indicated that you could just pick up one beastie and then let your shuttle get destroyed, as that refills a quarter of your fuel supply each time you do it. There's not a lot out there on Cosmic Ark's sales other than Fulop noting it wasn't as big a hit as Demon Attack. It doesn't appear to have charted in either Billboard's Top 15 when that started running in September, or in Video Game Update's Top 10 for 1982, though it did crack their monthly sales chart once. Cosmic Arc was their 5th best-selling game for September's edition, which would have been printed in August. The Enterprise PBS episode about Imagic and the making of Atlantis notes that Imagic's other summer games, besides Atlantis, were still selling pretty well. It also has a bit of a homebrew legacy, as in January 2022, Atari Age user Phayron released a port of the game to the Atari 8-bit computer line. After Cosmic Arc, Fulop made a dramatic shift away from action games, developing a 2-player puzzle title based on the Rubik's Race game called Cubicolor. Bruce Davis, the company's legal advisor, convinced the company not to release it since puzzle games weren't that popular, to which Fulop noted it demoed terribly. While he ended up self-publishing it years later, he then turned his attention to another very weird game called Fathom, which we'll see in 1983. Cosmic Arc really signifies a shift away from these sorts of shooter games Fulop had really focused on previously in his VCS career, and while it may not have been a huge hit as Demon Attack, it's still a pretty neat, unique title. Next time, the competition has entered the building.